For a great cup of joe, there's one thing you should know. Your morning brew can also be playful. Buff Boy Brewing guys make the temperature rise. And you surely feel naughty when you swallow our coffee. If you want some real heat, give your mouth a fine treat. You will want some more, rest assured. Buff Boy Brewing, you can't get enough of.
It's time for The Scribble, your weekly fix of celebrity chats, bizarre stories in the news, and basic random chatter with best-selling author and syndicated radio host Jeremy Bradley. Make sure your seat is in the upright and locked position and your barf bag is securely in place. Here's Jeremy Bradley.
Thank you very much, Larson. Jeremy Bradley here. This is The Scribble. 30 minutes of time-wasting fun coming your way today. I don't know how fun it is on the show this week, but we don't often jump into current events on this show simply because we like to kind of keep things evergreen in the sense that you can listen to this episode 2 years from now or, a year from now and it's not going to be dated. I guess I'm at that point in my life now where we have such a huge amount of throwaway content. Like, I don't understand why people spend hours and hours and hours, like editing TikTok videos or setting things up, whatever, and then realize that you post it, it gets that attention for a day, 2 days, maybe 3 days, and people have already moved on to the next thing. Right. I mean, that was when I first got into newspapers. I'll just tell everybody that, I've been a journalist for over 20 years. So there was something for me. I liked being, this is weird, but I liked being the columnist in a weekly newspaper because, and I was for 20 years, the Southeast Journal in Emerson, Manitoba. They just shut down, I think, maybe about 2 years ago. But I liked being in a weekly newspaper because you had more longevity, meaning that the paper sat on the table or, on the counter or wherever. You were basically there for a few days, right? Now, for a daily newspaper, which I was also in with the Winnipeg Free Press, unless you're a reporter every single day, you don't... I was a columnist that I had something once a week anyway, which is fine. My column would come out on the Mondays, and then... that was kind of it, right? Like I'm seen or I'm, whatever in the paper on Monday, and the next day, Tuesday, right? That Monday paper's gone. It's in the recycling and you're forgotten about. So that's why I like doing non-timely conversations and topics and whatever on this show. But in the realm of journalism, the big story this week is the Scott Pelley firing from 60 Minutes. So I don't know. We were talking about this earlier before I sat down to talk to you. Which angle should we approach for this commentary? Do I talk to you as a journalist and give you my thoughts as somebody who's in the industry? Do I give you my thoughts as a consumer of news, right? I mean, it's kind of weird. When you're a journalist, you appreciate news, but you don't necessarily... I don't know how to explain it. Like, you appreciate the craft, but was I ever a 60 Minutes viewer? No, I was not. But I understand and know the legacy, right? I know the history of the show. I know the reputation. I just, the success, having, 9 to 10 million viewers every Sunday night. Your biggest shows don't even get that. Your Survivors, your American Idols, your Bachelor and Bachelorette, I think we're getting maybe 2 million, and those were huge shows back in the day. So for 60 Minutes on a Sunday up against football, which those two, either football or CBS's 60 Minutes, were the ratings winner pretty much every week. That says something, right? The fact that the show has been, the number one news magazine program for 50 years, and you've had shows like Dateline and Primetime Live and 2020 and, all those other ones, 48 Hours, which is also on CBS. I've never understood why CBS has this fascination with numbers, right? 48 Hours, 60 Minutes. But anyway, so I didn't know how to come to you and say, like, do I give you my clinical, assessment of the fate of journalism and under, the Trump administration? First of all, I'm a Canadian, so yes, I'm in the United States, but I have the option to go back to my homeland, Canada, if things just get too bad here in West Hollywood. So I'm a little bit in a different situation. So I'm gonna try to take it, I guess, from all sides, from the viewer, from the professional perspective, and that's what we're talking about on this scribble right after this.
Isn't it crazy that you wait for payday, but before you know it, you're strapped for cash again? It's time to stop blowing your money and become a smart spender with the book, The Official Guide to Being an American Cheapskate at cheapskatebook.com. Learn simple ways to cut costs at home every day and during special times of the year. Don't go broke at Christmas. Don't remortgage the house for a fancy vacation. The book is filled with tips to save you money throughout the year. Check out the best-selling book, The Official Guide to Being an American Cheapskate at cheapskatebook.com or on Amazon and iTunes.
Ever had something to get off your chest but never had the balls to say it? That's a load of crap. Speak Free with JB.com is exactly what you've been waiting for. Your chance to tell it like it is and not care what anybody else thinks. Have your say on issues of the day. Join newspaper and radio columnist Jeremy Bradley as he tells it like it is. Hundreds of thousands of people have stopped by, including some well-known celebrities who have had a chat with JB and speak candidly about what's really going on in the world. You can join them too. Have a rant or a rave. Be brave and head on over to www.speakfreewithjb.com now.
JB here on The Scribble. Now, here's the thing. You don't have to be a big news follower. And again, this isn't even about left or right. And like I said in the previous segment, I'm Canadian. I still don't know what left or right means when it comes to politics, because Canadians, if I'm educating my American listeners here, Canadians don't give a shit even about Canadian politics. And I'll give you an example. If I were to call my parents right now and ask them, they would probably know who the prime minister is. They definitely would have known that it was Trudeau because he was around for so long and whatever. I mean, they'll know the prime minister's name, but I'll say, okay, well, do you know Mark Carney's wife's name? I will bet my houses, plural, that my parents do not know Mark Carney's wife's name, or even if he's married. I mean, let's take that one step further. Would they have known Justin Trudeau's wife's name? I don't know. I don't think that they would have. Like I said, if I asked them today, I mean, maybe when he was prime minister and when he went through his separation with his wife, Sophie, maybe. But I don't think so. Now, could they name Obama's wife? Yeah, they would know Michelle Obama. Could they name Trump's wife? Yeah, they would know Melania. So it's interesting, at least Canadians have that distinction. I'm not throwing my parents under the bus. I'm just giving that as an example that most people probably don't know our prime minister's wife's name right now, the current prime minister's wife. Anyhow, so yes, Canadians really don't give two shits about politics. Now, we find it fascinating to watch what's happening with United States, with American politics. But whatever. I mean, we watch from a distance. We get our popcorn, and when we know that Trump is doing a State of the Union or a rally or a debate, I mean, we tune in for that because that's going to be entertaining for us. So you've heard about how mainstream media is under attack. Now, again, this is where people are going to go and say, well, the mainstream media is dead. TV and radio and newspaper and all that's old school and mainstream. Here's the thing, though. I don't like the term independent journalist or citizen journalist, because what that does is that bastardizes the actual craft of journalism. And journalism is researching, gathering, checking more than one source, and it's not giving opinion. So me, when I was an editorial columnist in the Southeast Journal, as I mentioned earlier, that was solely opinion. That was me just whatever's on my, basically like this show. Whatever I feel like dumping on you in the newspaper that week, that's what I'm writing about. That is not journalism. So I want people to understand that you can use the term independent journalist or citizen journalist, but as soon as the person is injecting opinion or they're not speaking facts, then it's not journalism. So when I watch networks like CNN or MSNBC or MS Now, the primetime shows, like, as soon as you bring in a panel to discuss it, it's news, yes, but it's not journalism. You're discussing the news. That's commentary. That's debate. CNN used to be, back in the day, which is why I loved it when I was growing up and wanted to be a journalist, was that it was news. You were watching the plane coming in, making an emergency landing. What's going to happen? Is it going to crash? Is it going to be on fire? Is it going to be that? You're watching whatever it was. They would go to, somewhere in the United States or in Canada or Europe or whatever, and you're watching it play out in real time as the fully. That's what news reporting was. But everything has become about politics. And I think I mentioned this on the show not too long ago when we had Chris Cuomo on my radio show back in the day. And I wanted to talk to him about the state of news, this exact topic. And he kept taking it back to politics. And I kind of tried to reel him in and be like, I'm talking news, Chris. I'm not talking politics. And then I just remembered that that's his thing, though, right? That's what he's known for, is a political commentary. So, journalism is, give me the facts. Okay, so there was a fire today. It was, it was a two-story building. There were 4 people evacuated. There were no injuries. The fire department says that the cause was electrical. That's journalism. That's facts. Now, as soon as you start going and saying things like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of what you would give an opinion about an apartment complex that burned down. I should have planned out my example beforehand. But as soon as I start going and saying, well, this and this and this, and just something that's either irrelevant to the story or to the fire, or just where you go and say, that's what you think, though. You're not giving facts. And one thing that my journalism instructor, Duncan McMonigal, told us, he was always writing on the board, says who, S-E-Z or S-E-Z, says who. You always cite your source. Because this way, if it's wrong, okay, well, it was the fire chief that told us this, right? This way, it's not Jeremy just saying 4 people were, evacuated and made it out safely. No, Fire Chief Bob Smith said, because you've got to cite your source. You've got to give that, this is our official person. That's, he's the one saying it. It's not Jeremy. Don't get pissed off at Jeremy or the newspaper or whoever. Fire Chief Bob Smith said 4 people were evacuated. There were no injuries. So citizen journalism, that's, it's being misconstrued because that's somebody who's just setting up a microphone and their little YouTube channel and just going on rants about politics and mainstream media and this and that. That is not journalism. Now, this is where I disagree with, somebody like Don Lemon, who calls himself a citizen journalist. I sit there and go, as soon as you start injecting your opinion and thoughts and going on rants and whatever, that's not journalism. It's commentary. They're 2 different things. When Don was arrested after that church protest thing, he was saying that I'm going there as a journalist or whatever. At the same time, he was seen on video, hugging people, a protester or whatever. I'm sorry, if you're going there as a journalist, you're not doing that. Maybe a handshake or something, but it seemed very friendly. And as soon as, to me, when I saw that, I was kind of like, that's crossing the line. And again, another thing is that a journalist would remain on the outside of the building. They would not be part of it going in there. You could go and say, well, a church is, it's sort of public property, and you're going to watch from the sidelines. You're not going to be, trespassing and pushing your way into the building with the crowd. Now, again, you could go and argue and say, well, on January 6th, reporters, journalists were kind of doing that as well with the embedded into the... That's a different scenario because journalists, especially if they're accredited, would have the authority to go into that building, right? So it's a little bit different when you're going into an event, a church service or ceremony or into the congregation and interrupting, scaring people, whatever, with the mob. You can stand outside, you can capture the moments, but as soon as you're going into the property, that's where, to me, that's a slippery slope when you do something like that. So I do have thoughts about journalism, and I still believe that, I never liked, a newspaper like the New York Post, we had in Winnipeg, it was the Winnipeg Sun, it was the tabloid newspaper. And so as soon as I would see the headline, I would walk by on my way to school or whatever, and you'd have those newspaper boxes on the sidewalk, and I would see that it would say, pervert arrested. Maybe he was a pedophile, maybe he was whatever, but as soon as you start name calling that, and I was feeling that way even as a teenager, I was kind of like, That's editorializing. That's not journalism. That's, but again, then I was, it's a tabloid newspaper. So that's, they're doing that to sell the sensationalism and whatever. But I've never liked that either. So, as soon as you see like sleazebag or creep or pervert or whatever, that's where I'm just like, that again, yes, it's attention grabbing. Yes, maybe that is what the person is. I'm not defending a child molester or a rapist. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is you let the audience decide if the guy is the creep, a pervert, or, whatever. You put it out there. You put the facts, the story out there. This is what happened. The guy is accused of or is alleged to have done. And if he's faced charges, whatever, you give those facts. The viewer decides if he's a pervert, if he's a creep, if he's, whatever. That's what journalism is. So we'll get to 60 Minutes then in a sec. We're going to take a break. But I want to know your thoughts on journalism. This is not mainstream, left, right, newspapers are dead, radio is dead, Trump is, censoring, blah, blah. No. I'm just saying, do you still respect the initial craft of journalism, which was just as I described it there? Facts only. Send me an email, live, L-I-V-E, at jbonair.com, live at jbonair.com. Back on the Scribble, talking about 60 Minutes right after this.
Who are the Kardashians feuding with now? What did that little thug Justin Bieber do this time? Who's getting hitched? And who's headed for Splitsville? Hear the latest celebrity news and gossip every day on Entertainment Wrap-Up. The good, the bad, the ugly, but mostly the ridiculously hilarious. It's all recapped in this daily segment at entertainmentwrapup.com. Have a laugh at the expense of the rich and famous when they take themselves way too seriously. It's 3 minutes of time-wasting fun at entertainmentwrapup.com. Check out Entertainment Wrap-Up at entertainmentwrapup.com. Brought to you by Speak Free Books.
JB here on the show. All right, so Scott Pelley, legendary news anchor, correspondent, I mean, you name it. He was at CBS for, I think it was 37 years, they said. And he was booted from 60 Minutes earlier this week after an explosive meeting on Monday with his editor-in-chief, Barry Weiss, who really has no experience in producing television news, or television news magazine programming anyway. And then the new executive producer or whatever, and so there was this staff meeting, and the new guy was brought in to sort of introduce himself to the team, and then Pelley just squared up and let him have it. Now, so you can go on to, as you're listening to this, you can go read sort of like the full story, and there's been conflicting statements from CBS and then from Pelley, and CBS says one thing, and then Pelley comes back and fires back and says something else. So there's a couple of sides to this, right? Is Pelley right for speaking up and standing his ground and saying, look, I'm not going to be, pushed around by people who don't understand this business or who are telling me to inject bias or to go with things that are unverified, which is what Pelley's asserting, or did he need to stand down a little bit and say, people are saying, well, those are your bosses first and foremost, like, chill the fuck out. Yeah, you might have the seniority here, 30 some years, but at the end of the day, those are still your bosses. So there is a way to have constructive dialogue if you disagree with something, which, by the way, let me tell you, almost, not every, but almost every job that I ever had that was not in media, I was fired from. Why? Because I do speak up, I do defend myself, I stick up for things, and I will speak my mind. And bosses just don't like that. So from a media job, I've never, well, I've owned my own company for 20 years now, but when I worked retail or when, I would challenge authority. And that's exactly what a journalist does, right? Especially when it comes to politics. So there's two sides to the debate, which is, was he right? Was Scott Pelley right for speaking up, or did he overstep and he acted the fool in front of his colleagues? Now we're hearing from that meeting on Monday that his colleagues had his back and applauded him and even gave almost like a standing ovation when the boss stormed out of the room. But again, does that make you right in that situation? No, it does not. You might have the support of your colleagues, and we'll see, how much support he gets. Will some of them resign in protest, right? And then there is the side that's going and saying, as I mentioned, 60 Minutes is maybe a little bit high on its horse because, sure, it might be ratings, but it's just this, highfalutin kind of, come down to reality. Like, you might have the ratings, you might have the respected history, but you're not the shit. Like, you're not the end-all, be-all. So calm down, right? And then we hear from outsiders who say, well, if you don't like it, then quit your job and don't work there. And then the flip side of that is, well, that's your income and that's, you've got a family to support or whatever it is. It's not necessarily that easy. And sure, can I see Scott Pelley suddenly now joining the podcast, environment and the YouTube, will he be on one of these? Probably, I'm sure he was reportedly making $5 million a year and had about a year left on his contract. So it'll be interesting to see how CBS pays that out and we're guessing that, it's a speculation, but we're guessing that he's going to, lawyer up and try to, go for more money. So does he need to work? No. But this is the thing, is that when you're a journalist and when you're, a fighter like that, you can't stay away for very long. Now, we do see people who are in and out of the industry very quickly now. For my part, I don't like where the industry is headed. I don't like the fact that now journalists are it's called All About Me TV, where you see them just doing selfies and duck face, and that's something that's, your focus is not on the journalism at that point, and so you lose credibility when you're doing things like that. When you're there covering the flood, meanwhile 7 people's houses have washed away, and you're doing a cute picture in your rain boots and your hat in the storm, holding your microphone ready to go live, you've made the moment about you, and that's not the case anymore. That's just you're not the story. But because you have your social media page and you're gonna, it's journalism or news, the news business, especially TV news, is just this, look at me and, look at how glamorous and watch me put on my makeup before the newscast and look at the dress I'm wearing to do the weather. Meanwhile, it's just your tits popping out. Use your Instagram then to give us weather alerts. And if there's a tornado coming or if there's a flood happening or whatever it is, I don't need to see the dress that you're going to be wearing on the news in the next, in 15 minutes from now. I don't care. So that's my as a mature viewer who's in his 40s, I'm kind of like, I don't need to see the blonde fluff head, talking about, this is how we get ready for the show. First I put on my makeup, then I pick out the dress, and then my matching shoes. I don't fucking care about that. So you lose credibility instantly with me as soon as you start playing dress up and, these get ready with me. Like, what other industry? I mean, like, really? So I don't like where journalism is headed, and that's why I would never work at a daily, newspaper, whatever, again, because unless I have that creative freedom where it's kind of like, I'm going to work for an institution that allows me to do my research and to present journalism in the way that I know to do it, then I would consider it. So let me walk back what I just said a moment ago. I would do it again. But if it was one of these, places that's being censored and gutted and whatever, no. If I knew that I would be working for an editor who's like, I've been in this business for 40 years, Jeremy, you've been in it for 20, we know the deal, we know the drill, go for it. Okay, great. And that's why I like our team here. We've assembled our writers and producers from 20 some years ago when we all worked together at a publishing company. Bonnie Winters, our executive producer, she's 73. She's an old school journalist just as much as I am. And so I was talking with her because we're on summer break. She's in Calgary visiting her grandkids right now, but we still talk, all day, every day because we've got a company to run and shows and things to produce. So she's not necessarily a 60 Minutes viewer either, though she is the demographic. I'm not making a joke. She would be the demographic to watch it. But she respects old school journalism, right? She respects the institutions and just the way that, you do journalism. And I've texted her stories about, when Anderson Cooper left or when, just different things are happening. When there's these settlements with, Trump, the news outlets are paying him off and what have you. And she just goes and says, yeah, like it's a dying craft. It's a dying industry. But those are two different things, right? A craft and an industry are two different things. The industry, sure, in terms of ad revenue and all those other things and just the way that people are consuming news and then the actual craft of it, which is, no, you do your research and all those things I just outlined. So who's right in the CBS 60 Minutes fight? Is it Pelley or is it management? Well, if Pelley's telling the truth and saying, look, management is telling me to inject, bias or go with unverified sources and they're allowing politicians to pick who their correspondents are as though they're, going to a dog shelter and picking out a puppy. And, that's just not how things work in actual journalism. In journalism, it's whoever, the person, the correspondent, reporter, whatever you call them, it's whoever's assigned to that story. So if the politician is picking and choosing, well, no, I'll do the interview with Sam, but not Betty. I'll do the interview with Joe and not Frida. Well, no, you're doing it with the show. You're doing the interview with our show. And that's it. You don't get to pick and choose. You don't get to go and say, well, I'd like so-and-so to interview me. It just it doesn't happen. I would refuse it. If I was the editor, if I would say, then, you know what, fuck it. Or, one of the things that I was taught back in the day, going back to the Winnipeg Free Press, as I mentioned, well, I was still a student, but they would bring me in for election nights. I would help in the newsroom because election night is just a very, very busy night. And so what I would do was I would be one of the people, I'd get the list of all the candidates and I'd have their phone numbers and their campaign manager's phone numbers, and we'd have their home, their cell phone, the after party, where they're going to be. We'd have every fucking phone number for every person. And so we would say to them, all right, well, it's the Free Press calling. I just want to know, where are you going to be at 8:30? What's the best number to reach you on? We're going to call you for a quote as the numbers come in. This is the number to confirm. Okay, good. So I'm going to call. We'll call you. We'll get your response. The very first time that I ever did this, I went to the editor and I said, well, I've gone through the list. There's a bunch of these people. He's like, call them back and you tell them if they want to be in the fucking Free Press tomorrow, we need a phone number or they're not in the paper. That was a big time threat back then. Now we're going back 20 years or so. But that was enough to scare them. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, like I'm this 20-some-year-old student and I'm going to strong arm them, whatever. But here's the thing. It was the fucking Free Press, as he said. So this was the biggest, media outlet in the province of Manitoba. So you want to be on our news, you want the coverage, you want your picture on the front page, you want the, whatever, you give us your fucking phone number or you're not in. You're not in. You try to do that nowadays, I'm sure the politician would be like, well, fuck you then. And I'm never giving you a quote ever again, right? So it's kind of weird how the tables have turned in that regard. So, if I were the boss, now here's the thing. I own this company. I am the boss. If Bonnie comes up to me and she's squaring up and she's humiliating me in a meeting of her colleagues and my staff, I would have an issue with Bonnie. I sure would. But I would also kind of, this is where the difference is. Bonnie and I have worked together for 20 years, so she could probably get away with things that, this new guy coming in who's never met Scott Pelley before, well, different story. So, but again, if she did that, there would be a verbal smackdown to her. I would not, but she would also be professional and not present in that way. She would maybe pull me aside and say, hey, look, you're being an asshole about this or whatever. And I would say, okay, fine. But you're going to call me out and say that I'm not welcome here. You'd have to read the 60 Minutes meeting story to understand what I'm talking about. I probably would fire her. So that's what I'm saying is that I see this from a bunch of different perspectives. I see it from a journalism point of view. I see it from a viewer point of view. I see it from now a boss, from an employer point of view. Maybe they could have just had a sit-down meeting, which we hear was on tap for Tuesday. We talked about this on our show, Entertainment Wrap-Up, on Wednesday. So go to entertainmentwrapup.com and click on the Wednesday show, and you'll sort of hear the recap of what happened. But it sounds like, management had set up a meeting with Pelley for Tuesday, and no part of it indicated to him that this was, let's move forward and work together on this. He's saying that that's no. Now, again, CBS management goes and says that's not true. He comes back and says, look, this is what happened. I asked you why you fired this correspondent, this executive producer. You wouldn't answer. I'm willing to answer all your questions. Why aren't you answering to me? But again, who do you believe? So send me your thoughts on this. Again, there's so many different angles on this. Live, live at jbonair.com, live at jbonair.com. Back on the Scribble right after this.
It's never too early to start thinking about your next holiday. Have you checked out Mexico recently? From tequila tasting, swimming with horses, to ziplining through the jungle and watching whales and dolphins in their natural habitat, Puerto Vallarta has it all. Visit mexico.jbonair.com to see all the fun PV has to offer. That's at mexico.jbonair.com for hundreds of photos, interviews, and videos from around the tourist hotspot. Check out mexico.jbonair.com for all the fun. That's mexico.jbonair.com.
We hear you chirping. Get scribbling. Tweet up the Scribble at The Scribble Show. Join the discussion with Jeremy Bradley. It's all going down right now on Twitter at The Scribble Show and at thescribbleshow.com.
JB here, back on the Scribble. So just one other quick thing, because we are out of time and I've got to wrap this up. The question came up of, would you have resigned if you were in his situation? Here's the thing. If I knew that it was coming to that, as it sounds like Pelley did, because after he was fired, he went and said, so now I must leave. It's kind of almost sounding like he resigned, or like the wording of it, the way I interpreted it, was him basically going and saying, I had to do what I had to do, and my time is up here, so I've got to go. I mean, that comes after he was publicly fired. So it's sort of like, that's like quitting after you're being fired, right? So here's the thing. If he knew that this was going sideways, I know that I'm fired anyway. I know that there's no redeeming. Maybe I realize I overstepped, but I've got an ego about me because I've been here for 30 some years and you're just the new guy. There probably would be no going back from that. But what I definitely, as he says that he did, I would resist the interference. And I would absolutely stick to my guns and say, this is the way it is. I'm not putting my name on it, which I've done in many situations. I've written so many different things for different people and outlets and whatever. I'm not putting my name on it. I'm not putting my name to something that is not my actual opinion. I've written blogs, I've written speeches, commentaries, or, whatever. I'll put that person's name on it. But my name is not associated with it. I'll write a blog for, a payday loan company or a trucking company or whatever it is. It's not, I'll put somebody, I'm not one of those people who needs to have my name. I don't need to have the byline and the press clipping and the portfolio and whatever. I'm beyond that already in this point of my career in my life, but certainly when I was starting out. But now I'm happy I'll write it as long as the check, as long as I'm getting the money for it, put whoever's name on it. You can take credit for it as long as I'm paid. It's good enough for me. So would I have stepped down from 60 Minutes? I probably would have a long time ago. We heard that Anderson Cooper did that when he was disagreeing with the direction of things. So yeah, and I think that, again, somebody like those two, Anderson Cooper or Scott Pelley, I mean, they're not toast, right? I mean, their salaries are enough that they can be out of work for a while. And we know, as I mentioned, they're going to pop up on YouTube or a podcast or whatever it is to do their thing again. So, it's not like they needed those jobs, right? I mean, how many things does Anderson Cooper already host, right? But, if I wasn't somebody who was financially secure, and if I wasn't, in that situation, I would probably stick it out. I'd be looking for something on the side. I don't know that I would be definitely loyal to the job forever, but, yeah, I would. I wouldn't put up with it. I wouldn't stick up with it, or stick it out. I wouldn't put up with it. That was and on that note, my name is Jeremy Bradley. Once again, the email address, live@jbauto.com. I love hearing your thoughts and civil debate, I'll say. Name calling me and shit like that, I don't even bother. But anyway, I will talk to you next time on The Scribble with another rant that maybe you'll agree with and maybe you won't. Goodbye for now.
Want more Scribble? Check out thescribbleshow.com for past shows, celebrity interviews, cheapskate tips, and more. That's at thescribbleshow.com and on Twitter at @thescribbleshow. The Scribble is a speak-free media presentation.
If you want some real